Welcome to the qualifying round of this year's 3-minute thesis competition at Swansea University. My name's Dr. Teresa Phipps and I work in the training team in the Postgraduate Research Office. We're excited to have the opportunity to share some of the fascinating and important research that our postgraduate students from across the university are currently working on. 3-Minute Thesis is an international competition that originated at the University of Queensland in Australia and now takes place at over 900 universities across the world. It challenges research students to explain their work in a way that's accessible to a non-specialist audience. As the name suggests, presentations must be no longer than 3 minutes, and presenters are only permitted to use one static slide with no additional props or effects allowed. All of this means that the focus is purely upon the presenter, their words, and their ability to convey their research in a clear, concise, and engaging way. As with so many things over the last 12 months, this year we've had to change how we do things for 3-Minute Thesis. We've moved from running a live in-person event on both of our campuses to an online digital format. Despite these changes, we've been really pleased by the number of our students who have chosen to get involved with this year's competition. The shift to remote and digital technologies that we've all experienced over the last year has forced all of us to learn new skills and ways of engaging with research and with each other. Many of these changes are likely to be with us for the long term, so we're really pleased that this year's competition allows our students to practice presenting their work in this digital format. Presenting to camera is very different to performing to a lecture theatre full of people and doesn't come naturally to most of us, so we're really proud of all our students who have put in the time to attend training, develop their presentations and practice ahead of submitting their entry. I hope you enjoy watching all the presentations and gaining an insight into some of the fantastic research that our students are working on here at Swansea. The entries have all been judged by a panel from across the university. Chris Alton, Chair in Physics and Director of Oriel Science, Caroline Router, Scholarly Communications Officer in ISS, and Rhian Morris, Chair of the Public Engagement Forum. The students progressing to the final will be announced at the end of the video. So without further ado, it's over to our students with their 3-minute thesis presentations.
Extremely challenging, stretched to breaking point, a period of extreme healthcare resource pressure have been some of the news headlines over the past couple of months during the COVID-19 pandemic. But even before this, healthcare services were experiencing increasing pressures on their limited resources. One area of healthcare particularly feeling this pressure within Wales is in services for people affected by cancer. And this is because it's now estimated that 1 in 2 people within Wales will be diagnosed with cancer at some point in their lives. A champion of sorts was thought to have been found in the form of value-based healthcare. This way of working encourages healthcare services to improve the value of services that they deliver. But what do we mean by value? Does value mean the same to all of us? And whose values are we talking about? Let me put it to you this way. When I go to the cinema with my friends, we all buy different snacks for the movie. The point being, each of us value something different about the movie-going experience. Meaning, if you were to develop a definition of value in terms of the movie-going experience, you would need to involve each of us. And this is what my thesis is looking to tackle for healthcare services. I have identified the key healthcare stakeholders to involve in this discussion of value. I have identified the key healthcare stakeholders to include patients, carers, healthcare professionals, and members of the public. I'm currently in the process of interviewing these key healthcare stakeholders to gain an understanding of how they view value. Based upon my interview findings, I will develop a list of statements that describe value from the different healthcare stakeholder perspectives. I will then work again with these different groups to refine and reach agreement upon a final list of statements that they feel characterize value. I will then develop the final evaluation framework from this list of statements. It is my hope that this evaluation framework will be accessible to healthcare decision makers, healthcare professionals, and healthcare service users like you. Ultimately, this evaluation framework will be able to be used to determine if healthcare services are delivering the value that is expected by its stakeholders.
Are you ready? We will jump into the future. It's early morning, you try to wake up, and you are in your 60s. Who is this person near me? I don't know. What? You can't recognize your husband or your wife? Weird. Or same scenario, you try to wake up, but oh my god, it's so heavy to get up, and the more I try, the more I tremble. Well, unfortunately, you have one of the two most widespread neurodegenerative diseases that affect older people, Parkinson or Alzheimer's disease. The symptoms of those two diseases are due to the loss of specific cells in specific area of your brain. Why we have these losses? Well, we don't know, and that's why we don't have a effective treatment nor a specific diagnosis. However, we seem to see the light at the end of the tunnel because thanks to the tireless effort of scientists, a novel association between the levels in blood and the fluid that surrounds your brain, the CSF, fat, and the development of neurodegenerative diseases rise. What I'm trying to do with my PhD is to clarify if there is a relationship and what is the contribution of fat to the development of neurodegenerative diseases. I'm doing this by the combination of two different techniques. Liquid chromatography, thanks to I identify the fat into blood and CSF of Parkinson and Alzheimer patients, and the mass spectrometry, thanks to I quantify the levels of these fats. And I must tell you, I spent 6 months just to set up the method, and then I moved on to the Alzheimer patients. I have very promising results, but I still have to do more experiments. But trust me, remain on these screens, because in the nearest future, we will have finally clarified the contribution of fat to the development of the neurodegenerative diseases. And at the end, be diagnosed by one of the two will be as easy as doing a quick blood test. And we will have a specific and effective treatment to defeat those diseases. Thank you so much for the attention.
Imagine you are losing your sight. The world around you has become dark, dull, or simply unrecognizable. You are unable to recognize friends and loved ones, and ultimately unable to live your life in the same way. How do you feel? How do you interact socially with others when you can't see them? Do you see yourself as being disabled? Would you even tell other people you've lost your sight? This is the reality for over 2 million people in the UK living with sight loss, and this number is likely to increase given the current ageing population. Research has shown that sight loss is recognised as a major and extremely stressful life event, with many negative psychological consequences for well-being, social interaction, and identity. However, much of the existing research into the psychology of sight loss tends to focus on one single aspect, such as only looking at the impact of emotions or social interaction. This is where my research comes in. My research takes the view that sight loss and its consequences should be explored as an entire personal experience. Therefore, I conducted interviews with 10 people who have recently experienced sight loss, asking them to discuss the effect of sight loss on many aspects of psychology rather than just one. My current results highlight two significant issues: disclosure of sight loss and identity following sight loss. When disclosing sight loss to others, there was a clear conflict between needing to share this with others to gain help and support versus wanting to remain private for fear of awkwardness or rejection. There was also a divide when it came to social preferences, with many participants wanting to connect with other people who would also experience sight loss, versus others who actually felt segregated by their own impairment. Remember when I asked you whether you would see yourself as being disabled following losing your sight? All participants identified themselves as being disabled, although many viewed the term disability as a label placed on them by society. Taking this further, many saw their sight loss as an invisible disability, often feeling ignored or misunderstood by others. These findings clearly demonstrate a need for greater awareness of sight loss within psychology, but also more generally within everyday life. It is my hope that my research allows people with sight loss to be both seen and heard. While they may represent a statistic, they have a story, they have a voice. Above all, we cannot lose sight of sight loss. Thank you.
Students. Nobody likes us. I wonder why. However, like us or not, we are a major part of the biggest redevelopment of UK cities that we have seen for decades. My thesis looks at purpose-built student accommodation and its introduction into UK cities. Purpose-built student accommodation, or PBSA, is accommodation specifically built for students by private investors, and it often takes the form of tall tower blocks. The negative impacts of students on local residents, such as shown at the 3 photos at the top of the slide, alongside students themselves wanting better quality housing and private investors seeking high rental yields, are just some of the reasons why PBSA is being introduced into UK cities. The photo at the bottom of the slide is of PBSA that is currently being built in Swansea. There will be over 4,000 of PBSA beds introduced into the city over the next few years. Now, PBSA seems great. However, current research tells us that PBSA itself can result in further segregation between students and local residents, and a lack of affordable housing and housing diversity. Despite its increasing implementation in cities, the majority of existing research has focused on towns in England, and particularly the town of Loughborough. I will be the first researcher to look at PBSA in a Welsh context. I will interview a range of stakeholders, such as PBSA investors, private landlords, local residents, and of course students themselves, to explore whether PBSA will be a panacea between students and locals, and the tensions between these two groups, or whether it indeed will result in further social and economic issues for both stakeholders. The impacts of my findings will be important for policymakers on both a local and regional scale. I predict that in Swansea we will see rent prices increase for students due to the increasing cost of PBSA. Some of the PBSA blocks may not be filled. We've already seen this in Cardiff, with students not choosing to go and live in them. Finally, I do not believe they will solve issues between students and local residents, rather simply relocate them. So, to conclude, purpose-built student accommodation is beginning to dominate UK cities. I hope that my research informs stakeholders, and of course yourselves, that PBSA may not be the solution to the problems students bring. Thank you.
How do you cope? Do you know how you cope? What if you're exhausted and you haven't slept? What if you've been traumatised and have been through a potentially life-threatening experience where you felt out of control and unsafe? What if after all that you have a tiny, vulnerable, demanding human to look after, your new baby? How are you coping now? Childbirth is a significant life event, which at times can be life-threatening. Women have to make a transition from being a single person to being responsible for another life. There is an increased risk of mental illness following the birth of a baby, amounting to between 13 and 20%, and this excludes existing mental health conditions. What we do know is that you can use your strengths to cope. You can learn from adversity, you can adapt, seek support, and develop coping mechanisms. The study that I am doing explores what women's lives can tell us about surviving adversity and the development of coping mechanisms. So I have been looking at coping as a phenomenon. What is it? How do we do it? Do we do it alone or with help? Do we know that we are coping when we are using coping strategies? I used a salutogenic approach that focuses on factors that support health rather than factors that cause disease. This research aims to influence healthcare and social care support programs to build on mothers' existing strengths. The research approach argues that it is a mistake for researchers and health promoters always to focus on negative risk factors for health and well-being. We can focus on strengths and the wish to be motivated, the belief that a person can understand and comprehend challenges, and the belief that resources to cope are available to the person in terms of manageability. I interviewed mothers who had experience of mental health difficulties and had a child under 2 years old. From these interviews, some key themes emerged. The importance of getting enough sleep, the benefits of being able to ask for help, the value of nested support structures of partners, family, friends, work and community, the significance of taking care of yourself and not placing yourself at the bottom of the needs pile, the importance of identity outside of motherhood, and the child as a source of strength and the development of coping together with your baby. This study identifies sources of coping which can be developed as a positive health influence within healthcare and social care provision. Thank you.
English is the second official language that is taught after Arabic in Saudi Arabia. With my experience as a teacher, I noticed that learners are still facing difficulties acquiring English. One of the commonly used features is the article system: definite article the, indefinite article a and an, and bare nouns, which mean noun without any articles. But the learners are still finding difficult, which inspired me to investigate the acquisition of article system to improve the learner's accuracy. In Saudi Arabia, the article system is taught in general without showing different type. Thus, I choose two different types, specific and generic references, as you can see in the table. In English, specific references use definite article for specific context and indefinite article for non-specific context, while Arabic use definite article al for specific context and bare nouns for non-specific context. As for the second type, generic references, English have two types: noun phrase generic, as in the dinosaur is extinct, that use definite article for singular context, and bare nouns for plural context. The second type is sentence generic, as in an orange contains vitamin C, that use indefinite article for singular context and bare nouns for plural context, while Arabic only use the definite article al for these features. I selected specific and generic references for two reasons: to discover if there is any difference in the acquisition of specific and generic references, and to see whether the differences between English and Arabic will affect the learner's acquisition. I used 3 tasks and analyzed the findings. I find that there is a difference in the acquisition, as generic references were more difficult than specific references, which might be because of the complication of the generic references and the differences between English and Arabic. My findings will help other teachers to improve their learners' level by inspiring them to teach specific and generic references explicitly instead of teaching the article system in general by publishing my research. It will also help learners to improve their accuracy in one of the commonly used features in English, which is the article system.
Have you ever wondered how Facebook knows to recommend you a certain new friend? Maybe you think you know the answer to this question. Maybe it's all about the mutual friends that you have in common. But surely at some point you've been recommended a friend that you had no mutual friends with. Of course, there are many techniques at work here, but one approach to social network analysis that you may not be aware of is the use of community finding to group people by their friendships. The amazing thing about basic community finding algorithms is that they don't require any information about the individuals in order to do this. Not their names, ages, interests, or anything else. So how is this possible? Let's take a look at my slide. In this data, the points represent people, and the lines show the friendships between them. If I asked you to group the people in Network 1 into communities, you might have some idea about how to do this, even though there's no other information present. But when we move to Network 2, it becomes a bit more difficult for us humans to do this, because there's no obvious groups in the data. However, a community finding algorithm can still produce a solution. This is where my research comes in. My aim is to provide easy to understand explanations about the communities found by an unexplainable algorithm. So far, I've done this using analysis of certain features that are present in the social networks, using machine learning. These sorts of features might be things like, how many friends does this person have? How many friends do their friends have? How many degrees of separation are there between these two people? These are just examples from a long list, but the important thing is they can be calculated just by looking at the network. In the future, I aim to design a visual tool that will enable other researchers to explore the communities present in their networks. But who are these researchers? Why does anyone care about the communities in social networks? Does it really matter what content you're recommended online? Well, maybe it doesn't matter to you. But what if you have a friend who's clinically depressed, and the friends that they're being recommended are constantly posting pictures of self-harm? What if your children are being shown depictions of alcohol misuse by the friends they're recommended? The researchers that I intend to work with are public health researchers, exploring the spread of self-harm and alcohol misuse on Instagram. Their aim is to design interventions that will prevent the spread of this content online and ultimately protect young people from self-harm and alcohol misuse. Thank you.
Well, if you do not speak Mandarin, you may not have a clue about what I just said. Imagine that we have an on-site interpreter. The problem is solved. But before the interpreter is qualified to do the job, how can she or he be well trained? Well, one element is the learning environment. Student-centered environment, which means students explore knowledge largely by themselves, rather than passively receive the knowledge from the teachers, is supported by many interpreting scholars in recent years. But some real interpreting classroom experiments indicate that the student-centered environment is not always effective, with student interpreters moaning about getting half the result in twice the time. So, what's wrong? Some theories propose that different learning environments suits the acquisition of different kinds of knowledge differently, so the student-centered environment may not suit the learning of all kinds of interpreting knowledge. Besides, several studies show that the learning environment types can affect the performance of students with different learning ability types. That is to say, the student-centered environment may neither suit every student interpreter when their learning ability varies, In my research, I intend to find the intricate relations among the three: learning environment, interpreting knowledge, and learning ability types. Based on the relations, I very much expect that my research could provide a targeted, effective training method for future interpreters. Researching on such topic is very important because interpreters are the language barrier breakers. I dare to say, today's human society cannot function properly without them. From international organizations' aid projects in the developing world to the recent multinational cooperation in developing COVID-19 vaccines and treatments, and many others. Interpreters break the language barrier to help people communicate and cooperate for a better future. But beforehand, becoming a qualified interpreter is laborious. Working hard but get little results is not that unusual. Finding an effective interpreter training method can enable more qualified future language barrier breakers to help the world continuously build a communicative and cooperative community. 谢谢大家. Thank you.
More people than ever are using food banks and are food insecure, and by the year 2050 it is estimated there will be a global increase in food demand of 50%, showing the need for new innovative technology to take over. One such technology is aquaponics, and many of you are probably thinking, what is it? Aquaponics is the combination of aquaculture, so fish farming, and hydroponics, which is soilless crop farming, together in one system where the fish provide at least 50% of the nutrients for the plants provide filtration for the fish so the water can be recirculated, just as shown in the diagram, where feed is an integral part to the nutrient supply into the system. There are some key advantages of aquaponics. This would be that it uses 1/10 of the water, it uses 20% of the land of traditional farming, crops can be grown all year round, and it's ideal for places that have limited access to fresh water. Although inherently there are some disadvantages, this being there's a high initial investment cost, the people's perception is generally quite poor, and the unsustainability of the feed. And this is where my research comes in. Despite the importance of feed, I found that there's very little research done on aquaponics and how the feed influences the nutrients. So from my work, I have found that feed type can greatly influence the nutrients in the water and therefore the plants that can be grown. And that means that the feed can be tailored to meet the needs of the fish and the plants and be made more sustainable this way. And subsequently from this work, I looked at the use of microalgae to replace fish meal and fish oil in normal feeds to make it more sustainable that way. And I found that generally an inclusion of 20% is beneficial to the fish and the plants at any inclusion level, but an inclusion level of 100% of microalgae can actually be used and still have beneficial effects on the fish, with tilapia in this case. But having a system like this, which you can make more sustainable and use proper feed, is all well and good. But if people do not like the system or are not aware of the system, then it's not feasible. So currently I'm doing research on people's perception of aquaponics, and from previous work I found that generally people don't know what it is, and as a result they are wary of it. And preliminary results from my work, I have found that up to 70% of people have never even heard of the term, and only about 50% of people are willing to pay organic prices for aquaponics. So why does aquaponics matter, and what difference will it make? In this case, I'm working with an architect company in Swansea to build a new building in Swansea where is integrated into the building and is community driven and can help make the local area more sustainable, selling local produce. And in a wider context, if we can make feed more sustainable even for aquaculture, it will massively mitigate the effects of aquaculture. Thank you.
Did you know that if you put a magnet in a hot enough oven, it will lose its magnetization? This is just one instance of what's known as a phase transition, along with more familiar examples like the freezing or evaporation of water. Now, physics does a great job of explaining why this happens to the magnet, but I want to know how this happens. What drives this change? What exact temperature does the oven need to be? Topological data analysis is a new field of mathematics which leverages ideas and tools from geometry in order to analyze data. The premise is simple. Shape matters. It allows us to make quantitative measurements of the connectivity of a dataset. For example, how it might cluster into groups or form circles. Take a look at the left image. This was produced by taking a special X-ray of a magnet. The lines and arrows show us the internal magnetic field, and the behavior of these determines how magnetically strong the entire magnet is. It's immediately clear to us that circular structures are playing a pretty big role here. The idea behind my work then is to take these tools from topological data analysis and use them to study the phase transition undergone by magnets in the oven. Now, at this point, you might be imagining me putting on my oven gloves and thinking, how on earth does that work? But rather than studying real magnets, like the image on the left, I study mathematical models of magnets, like the image on the right. A helpful bit of physics called universality tells us that certain properties of a phase transition we see in the model will exactly reflect what goes on in the real world. By writing code, I've simulated a simplified version of what the inside of a magnet might look like at different temperatures. This is what gives me the data to analyze and allows me to see how increasing the temperature leads to interesting geometric changes which drive the phase transition. We can almost literally see how the magnet loses its magnetization in a brand new light. The aim going forward is to develop this approach so that we can extract a precise estimate of the transition temperature, as well as other properties of interest to physicists. So that's my research. But it's not the whole story. You see, we're not all that interested in magnets. The hope is, by developing this approach in this relatively straightforward case, it will later be able to offer us insights into phase transitions at the very forefront of physics, the world of quantum, and the kind of transitions that only go on in the center of stars. The possibilities for future work are many, and at least to me, very exciting. Thank you.
Pregnancy, the most natural phenomena that a large proportion of the world's population will experience at some point in their lives, often more than once. Much effort has gone into understanding pregnancy and why it sometimes goes wrong, yet still many women and their babies succumb to poor pregnancy outcomes. The risk of many of these outcomes, such as spontaneous miscarriage, preeclampsia, a pregnancy condition signaled by high blood pressure, and gestational diabetes, are all increased when the mother is obese. Like obesity in general, maternal obesity is increasing. In the UK, more than half of women are overweight or obese at the start of pregnancy. We don't really know why obesity in pregnancy can cause poorer outcomes, but obesity in the general population is associated with a chronic low level of inflammation due to the release of molecules from fat tissue. This can affect the function of many other cells and tissues in the body, including the immune system, which plays a vital role in sustaining a healthy pregnancy, and so any disruption to this can lead to undesired responses. One example in pregnancy is the placenta, which is the organ linking mother to baby, and it is full of important immune cells, such as macrophages, which play a role in placental development and maintaining a healthy pregnancy. Macrophages are found not only in the placenta, but in all of our tissues. They can be pro-inflammatory, for example in response to bacterial or viral infection, or anti-inflammatory, and help repair tissue damage if it occurs. Keeping this balance between the pro-inflammatory and anti-inflammatory function of macrophages in the placenta is very important, and we think that this is disrupted in pregnancies of obese women. We already know that the placenta of obese women is more inflammatory, and we are starting to really understand that the immune system and the function of cells such as macrophages is sensitive to our diet. Nutritional imbalances such as too much sugar or too much fat that occur with obesity can change the way that macrophages function and disrupt the balance between the pro-inflammatory and anti-inflammatory activity, We have all heard the saying, you are what you eat. Well, this applies to immune cells such as macrophages too. My research aim is to identify if the higher levels of fat and sugar found in obese pregnant women can change the way that macrophages in the placenta function. I will do this by isolating macrophages from the placenta of healthy weight and obese pregnant women and analyse differences in their function and how they use fats and sugar. These results could help identify why obese pregnant women can have problems and hopefully identify ways to prevent these problems.
When you switch on the light or make yourself a cup of tea, have you ever thought about what it actually takes to make that happen? And just as importantly, how can that electricity be delivered to your doorstep in a more sustainable and economic way? Right now, we are all facing a climate crisis and in turn a growing political and economic urgency to support sustainable energy policies. Tackling climate change is no easy feat. The UK has a legally binding goal to reduce emissions by at least 80% by 2050, starting with an aim to phase out coal by 2025. How does the government even propose doing this? By building on what are known as nationally significant infrastructures across all regions of the UK. These are focused on renewable energy collected from renewable resources such as sunlight and wind, and low-carbon electricity sourced from technologies such as nuclear power stations. The target here is to provide an energy mix consisting of wind, solar, and nuclear generation. The benefits are these: uninterrupted availability of energy, affordability, and meeting sustainability goals. My research examines the social cost involved in building such a nationally significant infrastructure project by focusing a lens on the Hinkley Point C nuclear power station currently being built in Somerset. It will provide low-carbon electricity to 6 million homes, or meet 7% of the UK's energy needs. However, nuclear energy is also one of the most complex projects due to its controversial past. For example, Chernobyl in 1986 and the Fukushima disaster in 2011. As a result, much social science research has focused on how local communities understand and reconcile living with large nuclear infrastructures. But what we still don't understand is the social impact on engineering contractors who are actually working on these nationally significant infrastructure projects. So, to get their stories and an in-depth understanding on how contractors and subcontractors actually experience working on these nationally significant infrastructure projects, I will be using ethnographic methods. It is a research approach that involves interviews and also observing behavior over an extended period of time. Without this type of research, experiences, practices, and implications will remain unknown. Hence, it is an opportunity to influence future energy policies. This research explores how, why, and what are the social impacts, and under what conditions and contexts are these projects delivered in a more sustainable and economical way. Thank you.
Psychology has historically tried to fix what's wrong with people, and has assumed that reducing impairment is the same as improving someone's well-being. But imagine you were diagnosed with a chronic mental or physical health disorder. Is there no opportunity for you to experience well-being because you have to live with some limitations? Our research group argues this isn't the case. We have developed a holistic model of well-being, which summarises well-being as 5 components: balanced minds, healthy bodies, meaningful relationships, connection to nature, and positive habits. I am proud to be an assistant psychologist, and I work with individuals with acquired brain injury. They have permanent cognitive, social, and psychological difficulties which turn their whole lives upside down. Our NHS service has developed a range of interventions based on these 5 components of well-being. We've done this using community partnerships with projects such as Surfability's adapted surf lessons and Down to Earth's nature-based rehab. So, what have our patients said about these services? One said it was a lifesaver. Another said it made them feel a part of something again. Another said it made them feel wanted again. The problem with measuring well-being is that we often rely on these patient subjective experiences. But what if there was a way to physiologically measure well-being? We propose that these 5 components of well-being have one mechanism through which they impact well-being, and that is the vagus nerve in the brain. The vagus nerve can be measured by the time interval between each heartbeat, also known as heart rate variability, or HRV. My next step as a researcher is to continue to evaluate these fantastic interventions using the latest HRV technology. I will use monitors to collect data from patients to see whether our fantastic qualitative feedback aligns with the body's physical response. I will also conduct the first network meta-analysis of wellbeing interventions to compare their efficacy across different chronic conditions. We hope that this will build an evidence base for using these 5 components of wellbeing to design holistic interventions and to demonstrate that each and every one of us has the potential to improve our lives despite any limitations or disabilities.
So, you use the toilet, you flush the chain. You don't give a second thought to where the waste goes. But not everyone in the world has access to sewage sanitation. In fact, 2.3 billion people don't. In developing countries such as India, there are pit latrines. So what happens to this waste? Well, it's dumped untreated into the environment. It causes river pollution and contaminates fresh water supplies. Contaminated drinking water and poor sanitation causes 800,000 deaths every year. So what are we doing about this? Well, one method of safely treating fecal sludge is to heat it to high temperatures in the absence of oxygen. And this creates a carbon-rich product called biochar. It's kind of like a posh charcoal. Now, biochar is recalcitrant, and that means it doesn't degrade very easily. So carbon that would otherwise be lost to the atmosphere as CO2 is stored within the biochar, and this can help us mitigate climate change. Biochar is also free of all nasty pathogens and can be used within soil to improve crop yield. As part of my PhD, I've studied fecal sludge biochar from India. The first thing I found was that it has a high ash content, which means it's full of lovely minerals and nutrients beneficial to plants. It also has a unique structure. It's kind of like a sponge, like a hard sponge, and it's full of pores that provide ideal habitats for microbes to improve soil quality. These pores also retain water, so it can be really useful for crops in times of drought. Finally, I find that it had a high pH value, and this high alkalinity can be really useful to crops grown in acidic soil. For the next part of my research, I looked at growing tomatoes in an acidic, low nutrient soil, or as the farmer described it, a really crappy soil. I used 4 different treatments: soil on its own, soil plus biochar, soil plus fertilizer, and finally soil, biochar and fertilizer. I found that soil and biochar produced plants that were taller, they had far more tomatoes, and the tomatoes were bigger than those grown in just soil on its own. Finally, the soil, biochar and fertilizer treatment produced a tomato yield 3,300% greater than those plants grown in just soil alone. So next time you use the toilet, I hope you take a second to think about my research. Thank you very much for listening.
Play is the very essence of childhood. We need play to promote social and physical and emotional growth. So it is absolutely vital to a child's development that they have positive play experiences. But what happens if that child has to go into hospital, which many children do for whatever reason every year? Is the experience offered in the hospital promoting more than just their physical healing? This is the topic of my research. I am looking at the play experience of children in a hospital setting. I was inspired to do this research by stories from the past, by Billy, who went into hospital in 1946 with a broken leg and his mum could just wave to him through the window. Or Kazi, who went into hospital in 1971 and was given a basket to weave and a jigsaw to do. Things had moved on when Abby went into hospital in 1996 and she had a free playroom. But did it meet the needs of these children? I want the future to be different. If George ever has to go into hospital, I want that experience to help him understand what's happening to him, to have a therapeutic benefit, to aid his recovery, to aid his resilience. And in order to do that, I'm going to be evaluating what is happening for children when they play in hospital currently. I intend to visit some hospitals around the UK and hopefully overseas if that's allowed. I want to be able to observe children at play. I also want to talk to children, ask them, how is this for you? Has the experience provided a good benefit for you? I want to talk to families to find out how that play experience that their child is having has benefited. And I also want to talk to caregivers, the medical caregivers, about how they feel the play experience is. I hope that my research will highlight best practice and will encourage changes across the nation so that in the future, George, my grandson, or your grandson, or your children will have the play experience that gives them the most positive benefit and aids their recovery and healing and their feelings in the best way.
Hi, my name is Jess. I'm fine. I'm not unwell. I'm just frobly mobly, which is a 19th century term used to describe the state of not being unwell but not being well. It's here in the middle, and this is what we're aiming for as a society. For example, the approach of a lot of the NHS system is to move people from a state of being unwell to here, a state of frobly mobly. And this is where my model of well-being can come in. It provides pathways for these people to move up to here, experiencing well-being. For simplicity, I will refer to this model as ICE. I-C-E. The I refers to factors on an individual level that impact well-being. The C refers to community and social aspects that influence well-being. The E refers to environment, which concerns a physical and psychological connection to nature. Now, research has been done in these areas, but in disciplinary silos, and as such, no model of well-being has ever combined all of these research areas together. And this is what my PhD will do. I have applied these ICE domains when predicting well-being during the pandemic. So, for the individual, as an exemplar of health behaviours, I measured physical activity. And as exemplars of positive mental health, I measured gratitude and tragic optimism. On a community level, I measured social support, and on an environment level, I measured nature connection. I then conducted a regression analysis on 123 people. This analyses how well your variables, in my case the ICE domains, can predict an outcome variable, in my case well-being. Whilst controlling for socioeconomic status, age and gender, my ICE domains could account for up to 46% of someone's well-being, which is massive. In positive psychology, we're normally happy with 10 to 20%. And this is remarkable because there are evidence-based strategies proven to build on these ICE domains. So we can start providing pathways for people who are unwell or who are experiencing Frobly Mobly to start experiencing well-being, even under conditions such as the pandemic. So, should we be settling for a state of Frobly Mobly? No. Have a look at my model of well-being. Thank you.
Have you ever thought you might want to be a teacher? Look at these adverts. These adverts are designed to appeal to people like you, people who might be thinking about changing careers. Look at the children wrapped with attention. Look at the superhero teacher. Especially now in a pandemic, we need teachers who are going to change careers. Maybe you had a teacher that inspired you. Maybe you think that you've learned things in your life that you could help pass these things on to other people. We have got a big need for teachers right now, and these adverts are trying to get these people to change career and become teachers. The government wants you. Almost 50% of people surveyed felt they would be good teachers. So why is there a disconnect between people who want to be teachers and them actually staying in the profession? I was one of these career changers. I used to be a music and film journalist, but when I went on tour, I was also studying part-time, and eventually that led me back to Swansea University. At Swansea University, I started working with outreach, working with children who'd never thought about going to university, children from ages 14 to 18, and these were people that just hadn't even had people going to university in their families, and that's what inspired me to become a teacher, and that's when I changed careers. But of the 25 science teachers that qualified with me, only 5 are now teaching. A lot of people didn't even make it through the first year. So what was it about the training, what was it about the experience of being a teacher that made these teachers change their mind? That's what my research is about. My research is about finding what motivates people to become teachers, to become career changers, and what makes them stay and what makes them leave. What I'm finding is there's just a huge gap in the research. People are kind of aware there's a problem and there's lots of reasons why that might be, but some of those reasons are the same reason that people decide to stay too. Wales is changing. Wales is changing its curriculum faster than any other country in the Union. By 2022 we will have an entirely new curriculum, and in that curriculum teachers are meant to make the decisions about what to teach, when to teach it. They're meant to make up their own ideas, so we need people with a wider range of experience more than ever. I now teach on the chemistry PGCE at Swansea, so I'm more interested than ever about how we get the right teachers and how we keep those teachers, because everybody needs a good teacher and you could really change their lives.
Hello, is digital innovation truly global or just Western? Innovation in the West is pushing to integrate society with artificial intelligence, but there are still many regions struggling with essential high-tech basic needs. Is it due to laziness and ignorance, or this mindset that disregards different perspectives on the idea of development? For 20 years, Yaya, a successful fashion designer in Tema, Ghana, built a reliable customer base. She employs 19 people in her community, but her business is not on social media because she cannot use it. Yaya communicates excellently in the Zama language and knows basic English, but not well enough to use social media platforms rooted in English. To avoid security risk and high interest rates from banks, Yaya makes financial transactions through her mobile service provider, so she has never needed a debit card or bank account. What if Yaya is not able to learn English or does not want a debit card? Does it mean that she will never be able to use and pay for advertisements on social media? According to Internet World Statistics, there are presently 11.7 million people actively using the internet in Ghana.
but Ghanaian businesses are still underrepresented online. My premise is that until the problem of online payment and communication diversity are addressed, many businesses will be left out of the internet. Numerous studies link Yaya's reluctance to adopt social media to poor social media strategy. Some blame the government for little small business support, poor infrastructure and illiteracy. Few even argue that some businesses do not need social media. While this is partly true, without an existing social media tailored towards regions like Ghana, small businesses' needs will not be met, even if all the required infrastructure and strategies are in place. Kenya has impressed with its M-Pesa app, which small businesses use for financial transactions through mobile service providers. Research could also expand knowledge of communication types, including images and sign language for social media. My thesis explores communication and online payment on social media by small businesses in regions like Ghana to recommend improvements to social medias. Thank you.
Slim, toned, muscular. Words often used to describe the perfect physique. With social media fueling people's concerns over body image, many are looking for a quick fix in order to achieve their dream body. 2,4-dinitrophenol, or DMP, is a substance incorporated into weight loss pills that can get you that quick fix, but at a very expensive cost, and I'm not just talking about the price. DMP is being sold illegally online and is marketed as a safe weight loss agent. This could not be more misleading. DMP is able to speed up metabolism, burning fat without the need for calorie control. However, as a result of this, the body releases energy as heat, causing body temperature to rise above 40 degrees, resulting in hyperthermia and death. There is no specific antidote for DMP poisoning, and therefore this has led to 16 deaths in England and Wales since 2007. More than half these deaths have occurred since 2015, which is proof that DMP is a growing problem. We already know that haloperidol, an antipsychotic used in the treatment of schizophrenia, is able to change the chemical structure of DMP, making it less toxic. To confirm this, I used the California blackworm. When the worms are stimulated, they have two responses. When they are tapped on their head, they reverse backwards, and when they are tapped on their tail, they helical swim. These movements are easily quantified without the need for specialist equipment, making the worms perfect for testing the toxicity of drugs such as DMP. I first exposed the worms to DMP and stimulated them and measured their movement. I then exposed them to DMP and haloperidol in combination to see if the toxic effects of DMP could be reversed. As expected, when exposed to DMP, the worms' movements decreased. Both body reversal and helical swimming decreased at relatively low concentrations. This persisted for 10 minutes, however, after 24 hours, these decreases were still seen at the highest concentrations. When exposed to DMP and haloperidol in combination, after 10 minutes, the worms' movements were much like that as when they were exposed to DMP alone. However, after 24 hours, haloperidol had successfully reversed the toxic effects of DMP. Most cases of DMP poisoning are a result of taking weight loss tablets. These results are a step in the right direction to addressing the unmet clinical need, which is DMP poisoning, and developing an antidote for it.
Welcome to the Particle Gallery. Today's exhibition is about the microscopic constituents of our universe. As you enter, you'll find the first display just on your left. Take your favorite material, zoom into about 1/10 of a billionth of a meter. You're now looking at the atomic composition of that material. Whatever material you chose, the atoms you're looking at will be among those in the periodic table. Atoms are not indivisible particles. If your microscope was powerful enough, you'd be able to delve a little bit deeper and enter the realm of nuclear physics. At around a tenth of a billionth of a millionth of a meter, you'll encounter atomic nuclei, protons and neutrons. Here you'll also encounter the strong and weak nuclear forces, responsible for the binding of nuclei as well as radioactive decay. Going further beyond the nuclear world would bring us to the edge of our current understanding of small things. Our third exhibit displays a standard model of particle physics. The standard model can be thought of as an improved version of the periodic table. It's a list of particles which, as of today, we haven't managed to split into smaller constituents. Among the standard model particles are electrons, which can be found surrounding the nucleus of an atom, quarks, which are the particles that make up protons and neutrons, and photons, the particle associated with light. The standard model can explain almost all experiments performed on Earth to date. It is still not the answer to the question, what is everything made from? One of its shortcomings is that it has nothing to say about the force of gravity, perhaps the most familiar force to us. Attempts at exploring nature beyond the standard model are complicated due to our inability to make better microscopes. Given these difficulties, we, the employees of the gallery, have to resort to other means to come up with the content of our final exhibit. Our most promising candidate of the next layer of the onion is string theory. Its basic premise is to replace the notion of point particles by strings. So what do you do when your microscope isn't good enough? Well, like all physical theories, string theory is formulated in the language of mathematics. Our strategy is to use mathematics to explore the logical structure of the theory. In the absence of feasible experiments, this is a good avenue to subject our hypotheses to scrutiny. During my PhD, I've managed to find new connections between seemingly disparate corners of string theory. I've used these connections to make predictions about the results of certain mathematical calculations, which I've then confirmed by explicit computations.
Approximately 800,000 people die from suicide every year. One way we can prevent suicide is to identify those at risk of suicide and intervene. Roughly 40% of those who die from suicide attend accident and emergency services in the year before they die. This represents a really important place where we can identify those at risk and intervene. So currently, if you attend A&E with any suicidal thoughts or behaviours, you receive an assessment with a mental health practitioner where they decide on the level of help that you require. So my PhD compared the current method of assessment in A&E to our new method of assessment. The current method of assessment involves an unstructured exploration of the psychological, social and historical factors involved in the patient's life. The difficulty with this is that humans notoriously are bad at integrating multiple factors into one coherent judgment, especially under time pressure. We often prioritise unimportant factors or overlook really key issues. So our new assessment, the ROSP, tries to account for this. The ROSP asks the practitioner to systematically consider 20 key risk factors associated with suicidal behaviour. These are currently on the slides. After considering each factor in isolation, the practitioner then brings them all together in an overall evaluation of the individual, their risk, and what needs to be done to keep them safe. So, we tested whether the ROSP was better at identifying future suicidal behaviour compared to assessment as usual. When patients were referred for a risk assessment, the mental health practitioner conducted their assessment as usual, and at the same time I sat in the background and completed the ROSP assessment. We then followed patients up 3 months later using their NHS records to see if they'd engaged in any suicidal behaviour. Now, to test if an assessment is good at predicting an outcome, you need to know how often the assessment produces hits and how often it produces false alarms. In this context, a hit is when you say someone will engage in future suicidal behaviour, and they do, and a false alarm is when you say someone will engage in suicidal behaviour and they don't. So, if the analysis produces a number of 1, the orange line on the graph, this means that you perfectly predicted all suicidal behaviour with no false alarms. If your analysis produces a number of 0.5, the green line, that means your assessment was no better than chance and you may as well be basing your judgment off a coin toss. So we found that assessment as usual, the blue line, produced a number of 0.61, which was better than chance but well short of perfect, and the ROSP, the red line, produced a number of 0.78, which was much better than chance and significantly better than assessment as usual. So to conclude, our new assessment offers an improved way of identifying individuals at risk of suicide, and if we can identify those at risk of suicide and intervene, we can make important strides in preventing deaths from suicide. Thank you for listening.
And welcome. Probably you all know that more recently there is a trend toward generating electricity from renewable energy sources. At the same time, the electrification of the transportation and heating sectors will lead to an increase in the electricity demand. Although environmentally friendly, these technologies impose technical challenges in the electricity system. For example, a solar panel generates electricity in a sunny day, but not during overcast periods. However, we are used to have available electricity on demand. For example, electric vehicles connected to the distribution grid charge at random hours, and their users expect to be able to charge them when they need them. In addition, another issue is voltage unbalance. This term refers to this condition in which the voltages of the three conductors in an electricity system are not equal. Now, this inequality leads to poor quality of the electricity delivered to the customers. Voltage unbalance can be caused by low carbon technologies because these devices are connected in one phase, and since they are intermittent, they can cause unequal power flows in the three conductors. And the question is how we can minimize voltage unbalance occurrence while supporting the integration of low carbon technologies. Well, in this research, I'm trying to answer this question by proposing the use of battery energy storage systems. These units are installed either at electrical substations or across residential feeders. Now, the core component to interface these units to the grid is the power inverter. The power inverter is a sophisticated device designed to perform various functions. In this research, I'm proposing a function based on which the batteries charge or discharge in order to equalize the voltages during voltage unbalance condition in a system. Now, this function belongs to the family of ancillary services since it assists electricity operators to operate their grids efficiently. But what are the positive impacts from operating the grid under equal voltages? Well, the first is the improved quality of the electricity delivered to the customers. The second is the reduced energy losses. Thus, we have a more energy efficient electricity system. Thirdly, the increase of the lifetime of electric utility assets. The lower costs for investment for the electricity operators, which leads to lower costs for the final consumers. Finally, and most importantly, the integration of renewable energy sources into electric vehicles is facilitating, and the CO2 emissions is reduced. So in this research, I'm using both computer simulations and experimental methods to develop novel control algorithms. To date, a novel method has been developed in the simulation environment, and the results show us that appropriately designed battery units can mitigate voltage unbalance and equalize the voltages in a distribution system. To validate these results, experimental tests are going to be conducted by using physical inverters. Thank you for your attention.
Helen Keller is fake news. She's a conspiracy theory. She's a fraud. These are some of the recent statements that have been trending on TikTok that have taken known facts about disabled historical figures and claimed that they were fake. Nowadays, everyone from princes to presidents to everyday people are living their lives in the public eye. Every detail of their day is placed online for us to see, dissect and analyse. And even those people can become subject to conspiracy theories and fake news. My research focuses on disability history in the 19th century, when information about people's lives was less hyper-visible. And so examples such as these TikToks are reflective of why real disabled history matters. My work explores conditions of visibility such as partial visibility, invisibility, and hypervisibility, in which disabled people were experiencing and navigating and negotiating their identities within during the 19th century. During lockdown, my researchers had to move online and outside of the traditional archive. It is in these spaces online that we can see disability history is dealing with multiple issues of visibility, not only in how historically the archives have managed the material, preserved the material and made it accessible online, but also in how it's been overlooked and neglected by the wider general public, which has led to the misinformation that is fueling these TikToks. Historical figures that I'm exploring have already had to navigate and negotiate their disabled identity in their time period, but they're now having to do it in the present. Even when we have the writings of the person and we know their lived experience, it can still be erased. Florence Nightingale described herself as an incurable invalid. For her, there was no conflict in identifying both as disabled and as a nurse. But there is a conflict in how her history is being told and taught. Her disability has been made invisible and erased. And yet, as a historical figure, she is hypervisible. And it is because of this that her life and legacy are subject to being called fake or a conspiracy theory on certain social media platforms. Working and exploring conditions of visibility and how they manifest both for the individual and for how they are perceived is one of the core foundations of my work. When almost 1 in 5 people are disabled, it is vital that we ensure that we have well-rounded depictions of disabled people and that these are made visible to the general public. And perhaps through doing this, we can challenge some of the ableism that is fueling the misinformation behind these so-called history-inspired TikToks.
Movement, touch, sight, speech, understanding, and happiness. These are some of the most important human qualities when it comes to experiencing the world around us. So imagine if you were to have one, if not all of these functions taken away from you. Loss like this will be experienced at one point or another by sufferers of multiple sclerosis, or MS. This is a disease whereby our own immune system, the very thing that is supposed to defend our body, decides to attack our brain. MS can affect anywhere in the brain, causing massive amounts of damage, leading to either a dysfunction or a complete loss of function in that particular part of the brain affected. There are a lot of variables in which determines the degree of suffering in MS. For example, the area affected. People can have a more affected spinal cord, which would mean limb dysfunction. Some people may experience damage in areas of the brain responsible for vision, but others might experience damage in areas of the brain that don't actually result in any noticeable symptoms at first. The reason why MS can affect the entire brain, including the spinal cord, is because the thing that our immune system decides to destroy is present throughout these structures. It's called myelin. It's the protective layer around our most prevalent brain cell, the neuron. It acts in the same way a plastic coating does to a wire. If you remove that plastic coating, then the wire becomes exposed to the surrounding elements, causing damage. But also, the signals that are trying to go through that wire can jump to other nearby wires or neurons, causing more dysfunction. In MS, this puts the neuron under massive amounts of stress, so it dies and is not replaced, meaning patients only get worse and never recover. Currently, we have limited knowledge on what causes the immune system to betray our brain like this. It could be environmental or genetic, but it's most likely a combination of both. That's where people like me come in. I'm a pathologist, or in other words, a crime scene investigator of the microscopic world. Just like a detective, I look at the end point of a crime scene to try and look for clues and footprints that I can piece together to form a narrative of what happened. I do this by looking at post-mortem tissue of people who have unfortunately passed away with MS. However, this approach is limited if you don't pair it with other disciplines. That is why I'm not only using the traditional detective approach, I'm also using the latest technology to look at the genetics of MS in collaboration with Imperial College London. By looking at the different representations of the disease across the largest cohort of digital post-mortem MS tissue ever assembled, I hope that we can identify specific genetic explanations of the different types of damage which we see in MS. For example, a specific mutation that results in increased myelin or neuron loss in the spinal cord. This project will allow us to better understand MS and offer new, more personalized treatment opportunities to preserve these vital brain functions for those affected by this debilitating disease.
Although we may take it for granted on a daily basis, the ability of our immune system to defend against both foreign and native threats is crucial to our survival. It is like our own personal military defence force, and it is imperative that we understand how this defence force acts and is regulated in the fight against disease, a fact poignantly underlined by the events of the past year. A key question to ask is, what does the immune system consider a threat? Take, for example, a foreign organism implanting itself into your tissue, taking nutrients from your blood and excreting waste products into your body. This is a threat, right? Well, this is a description of pregnancy, albeit a crude one, but this naturally leads one to ask, why aren't all pregnancies terminated by an immune response? Like any well-disciplined army, the immune system is obedient and accountable to its generals, who keep immune responses in check and tell cells to stand down when necessary. In our bodies, we can consider a particular kind of immune cell, a regulatory T cell, as playing in the general, telling the immune system to stand down and not attack the developing fetus. As with any army, supplies are highly important. Fuel utilisation by the immune system is key to its proper function. Metabolic dysregulation, such as in obesity, has been linked to poor immune function and pregnancy complications such as preeclampsia. The danger of obesity has recently been brought into sharp focus by the SARS-CoV-2 pandemic, where obesity has been highlighted as a serious risk factor in the severity of the disease. In the lab, using blood donations from pregnant and non-pregnant women, I've begun to explore the hypothesis that regulatory T-cell function in pregnancy is dependent on metabolism, and dysregulation of metabolism by obesity can lead to impaired maternal immune responses. Examining protein markers on immune cells, including regulatory T cells, I've begun to build a picture of pregnancy-specific changes, noting a shift away from potentially harmful inflammatory responses. Future work will use advanced single-cell analysis to explore metabolic underpinnings of regulatory T cells and the effects of obesity. Beyond improving outcomes in pregnancy and empowering women to make informed decisions about the effects of obesity on their reproductive health, a better understanding of immune regulation could have wider applications. These include treatment of autoimmune diseases such as multiple sclerosis, which are characterised by a loss of immune regulation.
Making is the activity of designing, building or developing an object using physical or software-based fabrication tools, and in the last few years it has become a significant interest within the computer science research community, with tools such as 3D printers becoming significantly cheaper and easier to use, resulting in the democratization of more advanced making. While the research community has focused largely on making, of the making community, we feel that disability and making is an area that needs further investigation. People with disabilities are most likely to benefit from making, but there are also significant barriers facing people with disabilities getting involved in making. One of the significant barriers that people with disabilities face in their day-to-day living is also to do with accessibility tools. Accessibility tools are aimed to help people with a day-to-day living. However, researchers often point to that these tools are abandoned, with many citing it's due to the fact they're not doing what they're intended to do, or that users feel that it attracts too much stigma to them. My research aims to get people with disabilities into making, but also to understand what methods are required to get people with making involved. We also aim to get people with disabilities to design and develop their own accessibility tools, hoping to alleviate many of the problems that results in the abandonment of these said tools. In my PhD, I've also worked with external collaborators to develop tape blocks, which are a foam block-based electronic toolkit. We have electrical components strapped onto the foam box using electrical conductive tape, and the idea is you can put many of these circuits blocks to produce a circuit. For example, you could have a siren that goes off in the dark using a battery, a light sensor and a siren. You can see some of the circuits in the slides. We also ran a study with people with intellectual disabilities in Australia and found that tape blocks are a powerful toolkit and can be used to get people with additional learning needs into making and also to understand electronics. We're also currently researching how the Makerspace community have adapted to the coronavirus situation and understand the methods that they've put in place and how this can be used to help members with disability into making. For example, some makerspaces have set up a system where you have members go in, where maybe one at a time, but will also make for other members following a set of instructions that they have been set. Thank you for listening.
Virtual hands up if you have a brain. Now imagine your brain started to attack itself. A war is raging inside your skull, and you don't know why it's happening or how to stop it. This, in a nutshell, is multiple sclerosis. Let's imagine we're looking down a microscope. We all have billions of nerves within our brains, busy sending and receiving signals from the body. Normally, they're covered in a protective fatty layer called myelin. Picture an electrical wire. The internal metal wire transports the electrical signal, whilst the plastic outer coating insulates and protects it. In the case of nerves, the axon, or the metal wire, transports the signals, whilst the myelin sheath protects it. Multiple sclerosis affects more than 100,000 people in the UK and 2.3 million worldwide. In multiple sclerosis, the body attacks itself. Immune cells of the brain, called microglia, eat away at the myelin sheath. Less myelin means the signals travel less efficiently from the brain to the body, causing loss of movement and eyesight, problems with memory, and depression. I'm trying to understand what might be going awry in the brains of people with multiple sclerosis. To do this, I used donated brain tissue from people who did and did not live with the disease. I dissect the part of the brain I'm interested in, mash it up, and run it through an instrument called a mass spectrometer. This separates compounds by their weight and measures them. I'm interested in compounds called oxysterols. Each oxysterol has a unique fingerprint, just like you or I, so I'm able to identify and quantify how much of that oxysterol was in the brain. So why am I interested in oxysterols? Other scientists have shown that statins, cholesterol-lowering drugs, may be helpful for some people who have long-standing or progressive multiple sclerosis. Cholesterol is an important ingredient we all have a need in our bodies, and it's also the starting point for oxysterols. It seems counterintuitive that lowering cholesterol with statins would be beneficial for people who have multiple sclerosis, as they're already missing cholesterol due to the breakdown of the myelin, which is partly made from it. So I don't think that lowering cholesterol itself is responsible for the potentially beneficial effects of statins, so instead I'm investigating the oxysterols. I've found evidence that there is differences between oxysterols in people who did and did not live with multiple sclerosis. This is really exciting. It has the potential to help us design new drugs to change the amounts of oxysterols in someone's body, potentially providing treatments to people who currently have none. It's my hope that we are slowly getting closer to defeating the raging brain war that is multiple sclerosis.
Hello everybody, my name is Han. Today I'm going to talk about health and energy intake. So, have you guys been to gym? Of course, I believe most of us like to go to the gym. But because of COVID-19, we can't go to the gym. That's a big sad moment, is it? And after gym, what you guys gonna do? Of course, for boys, gonna be a lot of protein powder, I know. And for the rest of us, maybe we will take a lot of calorie to make up our body. And how much calorie do you take normally after gym? Have you calculated it about it? Will you take 100% of the calorie, or will you take 80% of the calorie? And actually, the result is very interesting. There is a very similar experiment which was undertaken a couple of years ago here in our medical school. And the experiment is basically to test about the brain function based on 100% of a calorie intake and 80% of calorie intake. Have a guess which one is better? The results is no, it is 80% of the calorie intake. It shows our brain have better performance and the cell loss reduced a lot, so which means it is very important. That's a surprise. 100% of the calorie intake doesn't help, and 80% of the calorie intake actually is the best thing. So after that, scientists start to think, what makes this situation to us? And a lot of researchers are trying to explore more situations about that. And what is the reason behind? Maybe because of our ancestors. Every time they will go to chase after food, like different animals, and walk in the farmland, and after that they will get the food. Maybe this is the reason. And for the proteins, it is even more interesting. And do you want to know what is the importance of protein play a role in our body? Vote to me, next time I will tell you what is the protein. Well, protein is very good for our health. I will tell you next time. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Ibrahima. I'm an engineering research student and I'm sponsored by a major steel manufacturing company to research how best to look after a material they use in their process. This material is a ceramic. Now if you're watching in the UK, you or at least someone you know drinks a cup of tea every now and again. Most tea mugs are made up of ceramics. Ceramics are good at withstanding or handling really high temperatures. That's why we use them. And they're good at keeping our tea nice and warm. Back to the steel making process. To make steel, well, iron and other elements have to be mixed together. But firstly, the iron has to be melted at high temperatures. We also need a container to contain this high temperature mixture and then mix it really well. Now, the container of choice, you guessed it, is actually a ceramic container. However, ceramics are not perfect, otherwise I would have no research. Ceramics have to be handled carefully. They can really handle high temperatures, but they cannot be suddenly introduced into a high temperature. They need to be gradually introduced into that temperature. So if they're suddenly introduced into a high temperature, they may shatter and break. And this type of failure, we call it a thermal shock failure. Why is this an issue? Well, you can imagine if liquid steel, which is really, really hot, is contained in a ceramic, and all of a sudden it just breaks. What could happen? It could be very dangerous for our sponsor, number one. Number two, it can be very costly for our sponsor too. And that's why I'm researching what is the best way to handle this material. And I'm doing that also in two ways. One is looking at how best to heat this material without it breaking. Number two takes us back to the point where this ceramic container was made. When this material was made, this ceramic container, carbon was added to it. And let's just say there's good and bad carbons. Now, carbon was actually put into this material to make it more resilient, more strong at resisting sudden temperature changes. But at high temperatures, carbon reacts with the air around us and leaves holes in this material. And this hole makes the material or ceramic container more prone to thermal shock failure. So my research focuses on looking at the best way to fingerprint these type of carbons so we know what carbons we're dealing with, but to also investigate what is the best way and the best speed to heat up this material to save money for our sponsor, but to also keep everybody safe in the process. Thank you.
People with chronic lung conditions such as COPD, bronchiectasis and cystic fibrosis make up 1.5 million people in the UK, with a significant proportion of them suffering with excessive sputum. Sputum that builds up in your airways can cause a number of unpleasant symptoms, including breathlessness, increased risk of infection and cough. Having a persistent cough can have a significant effect on your social, personal and work life, And I think that after 2020, we can all appreciate a little more how having a persistent cough can make you feel in a public place. There are many ways to clear your chest. Most are difficult, energetic and unpleasant. So in order to make sure that as healthcare professionals we're promoting the most effective and well-evidenced methods, my research aims to evaluate one of the many methods available. This will help grow the body of knowledge and inform collaborative healthcare conversations. Oscillatory positive expiratory pressure, the long name, or OPEP as it's more commonly known, are devices that rattle the air in your airways, loosening the sputum and enabling clearance. Better to have your sputum out than in. So with this in mind, I'm taking a two-pronged approach to gather knowledge. People with COPD make up the largest group amongst these people, with the NICE guidelines recommending 2 possible treatments in order to deal with excessive sputum. This is based on a large amount of historical data and years of clinical practice. However, there is a lack of evidence from robust clinical trials comparing OPEP with breathing exercises. My research aims to design a trial comparing OPEP and breathing exercises with meaningful outcomes to start to answer questions like, will using an OPEP device mean I cough less? Will I need to visit my GP less? Am I less likely to need to go to hospital with a chest infection if I clear my chest regularly? And is using an OPEP device effective and easy? Also, I aim to gather opinions and experiences of people suffering with excessive sputum on how they feel and deal with needing to clear their chest regularly and using an OPEP device. I hope that the knowledge gained will inform future research through bringing the stories of people living with these conditions to life.
Climate is changing, ice is melting, sea level is rising. 90% of the world's fresh water is stored in Antarctica. If this all were to melt, we would look at about 58 meters of sea level rise. But let's look at the general ice process, shown in the top picture for a moment. When it is snowing, the snow accumulates on the ground. With time, this snow is compressed to ice by its own weight. And when this ice layer is thick enough, it starts to float, similar like honey on bread. If the ice flows all the way to the sea and further, the glacier front starts to float, because ice has a lower density than water. We call these floating parts of the glacier ice shelves. Since the ice shelves are floating, they already displace water, and hence this ice has already contributed to sea level rise. But more interestingly, studies have shown that large ice shelves are slowing down inflowing glaciers, and therefore reducing the amount of ice that would otherwise start to float and add to sea level rise. To understand the flow of ice better, we use models to simulate its behavior. Most ice flow models are written for grounded ice, where ice is treated as a more simple viscous fluid. Ice shelves, on the other hand, experience changes on a much shorter timescale, like tides. In these shorter timescales, elastic properties have a larger contribution and need to be considered. In this research, I'm writing a viscoelastic open source model to take those additional facts into account. On the bottom of the slide, you can see an example of my model on a simplified cross-section. Here I look at the different viscosity values and its effect on ice flow velocity. The darker the colors in the graphs, the faster the ice flow. The aim is to get a better understanding of the current state of the ice shelves, as well as to improve future predictions. These will improve sea level rise estimations and hence aid risk assessment related to human population near coastal areas.
Are you sitting comfortably? Then I'll begin. I'm going to tell you a story about the power of reading and what happens when parents or carers and children share books together. Were you read to as a child? Did you enjoy it? Did you have books in your home? If you're at university, then you're likely to answer yes, because how often children are read to, their enjoyment of reading and the number of books in the home correlates strongly with educational attainment. The singer Dolly Parton dreamt of changing lives when she started the Imagination Library, a charity gifting a book a month for the first 5 years of life to more than 1 million children worldwide. And my research is going to help the Dollywood Foundation to change more lives by understanding what motivates parents to read with their babies and young children, and what's the impact of receiving books as gifts. To use Dolly's words, why would parents after a hard day working 9 to 5 spend more time reading with little Jolene? Lots of research looks at the outcomes from early shared reading, mostly focused on language and literacy skills. But my research aims to find out what families think and feel about reading with their child. As well as looking at data from school test scores, I created surveys for parents, and over 5,000 families responded, showing just how important parents think this topic is. I found that although families receiving Imagination Library books were less likely to have parents who are educated to degree level, a factor strongly linked to frequent reading, they were more likely to read with their child, particularly in the first year of life, than families who weren't gifted books. Families who didn't receive Imagination Library books were nearly 3 times more likely not to read at all with their children. And understanding what motivates families to start reading will help support families where this doesn't yet happen. I'm trying to understand what's important to families when they read with their child. And in this research, one word comes up more than any other. And it's not about helping their child to be clever or to be ready for school, though early shared reading does have a positive impact on these things. Parents talked about bonding. In fact, they talked about bonding or time spent with their child more than twice as often as they talked about the learning or language benefits of shared reading. Parents like to snuggle up with their child in a good book, and these behaviours build enjoyment of reading in their children. By better understanding what's important to parents, charities, educators and policymakers will be able to better support more families to read with children. And that's how my research will help families across the UK to live happily ever after.
So my name is Chris Alton. I'd like to thank the 33 participants who've entered in the 3-minute thesis competition. It's been a fantastic thing to be a judge, to see all your wonderful work. The thing I want to draw out and draw to your attention is what we're really looking for is not just conveying information like you would with words on an A4 sheet of paper. We'd like to see a connection between you and the audience, because when you make that connection, then that person is likely to go away and remember what you're saying. So that connection is the thing that we're most interested in seeing.
My name's Caroline Router. I am one of the judges in the competition. I particularly enjoyed watching your videos, and I was quite interested in the slide presentations. Some of them had really great impact. 1 or 2 of them needed some work. I was particularly interested to see that some of you used a title on your slides, whereas some of you didn't. The colour palette was interesting. Some of it was too busy, and accessibility needs to be something that you consider. The reading order was not entirely there for some people. Use your arrows if you need to express a reading preference order, up or down or across. One slide did have some spelling typos in it, which is a big negative, which perhaps is easily avoided. And it was really interesting to see that the majority of the slides absolutely nailed maximising the point and expressing the whole point of the research. So well done, everybody.
Hello, I'm Rhian Morris, one of the judges on 3MT this year. I'd just like to thank you all for your presentations. They were fantastic. And I'm going to speak a little bit about engagement. Some of you did this really, really well. I think some of you could demonstrate a little more passion and enthusiasm. I know this is particularly difficult when you're filming something, but you really need to connect and engage with the audience. It's okay to smile. It doesn't mean that it's not a professional presentation. If you're smiling, it's a good way to connect with the audience. Some people reading off screen. I know that sometimes that you need to check your notes, but this is rather distracting when you're watching someone's eye view change from side to side. You had really good questions, and this left me wanting to hear a lot more. Some of you had a fantastic pace on articulation. Some of you need to think about slowing down a little and taking a breath after a main point to let it sink in with the audience. So we've selected 19 fantastic presentations to go through to the final. Congratulations to all the finalists. You'll shortly see your names up on the screen. Well done to everyone. Diolch o galon I bawb. Da bob.
A big thank you to our judges for their careful consideration of all our entries, and most importantly to all our participants for sharing their research with us. The Swansea University final will take place in the spring. We'll be announcing the date soon, so please do join us then to hear more from our researchers.